Welcome to Papercuts and Plot Twists, where the paper is dangerous and the plots are twisted.
Paper cuts, what's the risk? Just another day in the life, just another plot twist. But is it a tragedy, a comedy, romantasy, just another fantasy? It's paper cuts and plot twists. The rest we'll wait and see.
Welcome to episode 1 of Papercuts and Plot Twists' first season. In today's episode, we'll be discussing moral dilemma and highlighting 4 stories from different authors who have kind of a moral dilemma happening in their books. I mean, don't we all? We'll look at Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, specifically the opening to the Inferno, and it wouldn't be a moral dilemma without some Shakespeare, especially the play Hamlet, in my humble opinion. But really, you could just pick a play and hit a moral dilemma. Like I said, it's Shakespeare. We're going to look at Jane Austen's Mansfield Park and her character Fanny Price. And lastly, a scene in the Twilight series, Book 3, Eclipse, which I like to call the Dark Night of the Soul. In addition to these dilemmas, we'll hear from a friend of our press and of this podcast, Amber Champagne. She's the owner of Champagne Apothecary and the creator of the skincare line Ethyst. More on that later. And with that, let's get the episode started. The first question we ask, why moral dilemma? I believe in right and wrong. There is room for the discernment of one's values and principles and personal responsibility and the consequences that follow certain decisions. So, if you're listening and you believe in moral relativism, we still apply an aspect of the moral dilemma, something that is experienced by the character or characters in the story. Back to our first question, why moral dilemma? We will see the varying ways that this is at work in the next 4 stories. Ultimately, when characters struggle with these moral questions, it is very human. It's part of the universal experience, and in this way, art reflects life. We understand a story through our own struggles and experiences. We want to know how the characters decide and what the consequences and conclusions result from those decisions. It's up to us whether we agree with the end results or not. Let's get into the Inferno by Dante. The translation I'm going to be using is by Robert Hollander and Jean Hollander. While Dante, the main character and author, descends, we're going to remain on this side of the river Acheron for the purpose of our discussion. I'm going to read from the Inferno. I'm going to read the first 3 lines in the Italian, and I haven't really studied it since college, so forgive me. And it's like reading Shakespeare in English. It's a little bit older than the modern Italian. And then I'm going to read it in English and maybe a few more lines than the first 3. So let's begin. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la diritta via era smarrita. In English, midway in the journey of our life, I came to myself in a dark wood, for the straight way is lost. The straight way was lost. And then it continues, how hard it is to tell the nature of that wood, savage, dense, and harsh. The very thought of it renews my fear. It is so bitter death is hardly more so. But to set forth the good I found, I will recount the other things I saw. How I came there I cannot really tell. I was so full asleep when I forsook the one true way. Opening of the Divine Comedy starts with a descent to hell. I had this epiphany when I was thinking about it. Dante's descent is his midlife crisis, and it's something many of us, I think, can relate to. Take, for instance, his realization that the straight way was lost. Have you ever gone through life doing the same things, getting the same results? Days go by, weeks go by, then years, and all of a sudden you wonder how you got where you are. You wonder, did I take a wrong turn somewhere? This realization often happens to the comedic characters where we see them at their projected worst and their resolve to make a change. Dante is the Middle Ages version of a male Bridget Jones, and this is his journal. Okay, I'm not going to go that far, but the point, he's lost. His life and its purpose is his moral dilemma. His purpose was love, and the object of this great love is lost to him, his Beatrice. The Divine Comedy, all 3 books, are a rising ascent to reclaim his life's purpose and love, making it a true comedy. This is different than what we'll see in Hamlet, a tragedy. Different moral dilemmas in different characters produce different results. We'll talk about that next. Before we continue on to Hamlet, I want to shout out to one of our subscribers on X. Thank you, Ice Rider, for being a super cool supporter of King Ari Press and me. You can find Ice Rider on X at The Ice Rider, a Mountain Dew loving Yeti, guardian of the San Juan Mountains. In a post from Ice Rider on January 2nd, the person you spend the most time with is yourself. Be a good friend to yourself today. Well said, friend. Now back to Hamlet. So, Hamlet. Talk about twisted plots. There are more turns than the teacup ride at Disneyland. Before I go any further, if you're scared of ghosts, there is one. If you don't want spoilers for Hamlet, 1, I have questions, and 2, spoilers are coming in 3, 2, 1. Okay, Act 1. Dead dad, former king of the land, appears to his son Hamlet. Hamlet swears revenge for his father, the former king of Denmark's murder. The dastardly dude in question is Hamlet's own uncle Claudius, now king and married to his mother Gertrude. Are you still with me? Okay, so Act 2, Hamlet acts like a lunatic and breaks it off with Ophelia, who loved Hamlet. Claudius and Polonius, Polonius is Ophelia's dad and assistant or something. They spy on him, and Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, Hamlet's friends, arrive. Hamlet tries to write a play to prick the king's conscience, truth will out and all that. Act 3, the play within a play, Hamlet observes the impact of the king and the queen, which Claudius storms out. Hamlet sees Claudius pray, which totally annoys him. He wants to make him really suffer, no need to send him to heaven if he doesn't have to, which is why Hamlet spares him this time. So, and then Polonius hides in Gertrude's room, and when Hamlet arrives, he stabs the curtains. Polonius dies where he hides. Act 4. Claudius sends Hamlet to England, and they arrange for him to die upon arrival. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead instead, after Hamlet sends them in his place. And Ophelia drowns, literally, but also in sorrow for Hamlet's rejection and her father's death. Now, finally, we're here. Act 5. There's a duel. They try to kill Hamlet using Laertes. This is Ophelia's brother and Polonius' son. With some poison, and everyone dies. Gertrude accidentally drinks the poison. Hamlet and Laertes run each other through with poison blades, I think. I'm pretty sure they're both poison. Hamlet kills Claudius in his own death throes, and then Horatio, Hamlet's friend, explains it all to Fortinbras, the new king, and thus ends the play. Everybody dies, total tragedy. And I want to thank Shakespeare.org for helping this breakdown, because, my memory has some of that stuff held together, and, I had to clarify, and they were a great help and source for that, and the play Hamlet, of course. So, twisted. So where did it go wrong? Hamlet wanted justice. This is his moral responsibility as the son and future king. The dilemma is partly in acting on it, getting all the facts and discerning who helped King Claudius. Is his mother innocent in all this? When I was thinking about Hamlet's dilemma, I was reminded of the Greek play, The Oresteia, where Orestes is charged by his sister Electra to avenge their father's Agamemnon's death. And in this case, it's actually Orestes' mother, Clytemnestra, who murdered their father, Agamemnon. And it isn't, so that happens, and then it isn't until Athena gets involved that justice for all the crimes is resolved. So in light of this play, as a comparison, you see how Shakespeare complicates it further, where Hamlet's imbalance is an imbalance in the scales of justice with revenge that's unchecked by anything like Athena, and he dies as a result. So this is similar moral dilemma, but the justice applied is different. And so we have Hamlet tipping the scales of justice through revenge. Like, his father died, and that's tragic, by his uncle's hand, Claudius. Maybe Polonius was in on it, but let's just say Claudius. So that's 1-to-1. But no, who dies? Polonius, Ophelia, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Gertrude, Laertes. Who did I miss? Well, and there's a war going on, so a lot of other people died too. But like in the little circle of Hamlet's family, they all died. True tragedy. And so now that we know that Fortinbras is going to be the king, and so maybe he learns from Hamlet's revenge plot narrative, it just didn't work out in his favor. And the moral dilemma is what kept Hamlet involved in it, because he kept going back and forth through justice, and he's trying to figure it out. And this play, this plot is twisted. It's all over the place in beautifully formed ways. And there's in that moral question that Shakespeare plays with, it's been like we can see it similarly in the Oresteia, and then we see it continuing here in Hamlet. And it's just it's cool, and it's amazing how you can get different results through using this dilemma. For Hamlet works out very differently than in the Oresteia. You have a different sense of justice, and something in that time too of Shakespeare is the imbalanced scales was often used. This idea of, I think they like Lady Luck or Lady Fortune. I think it's Lady Fortune, and she's on this scale. And then there's the inherent flaw. And for Hamlet, I've heard it debated what was his inherent flaw, and it was just that he didn't know when to stop. He just was revenge upon revenge, and it becomes accidental in a lot of ways. And he starts making mistakes, and he's blinded by his own self-righteousness, actually. And it all started with avenging his father's death, but turns into so much more. So that's Hamlet. And then we're going to come back and start talking about Mansfield Park briefly, and then Twilight briefly. And then we're going to hear from someone else, Amber Champagne, who is also another supporter and subscriber to King RE Press and me. And I just want to thank her so much for doing this. You'll hear a little bit more about her shortly. And with that, we will get into Mansfield Park. One more thing before we start our discussion of Mansfield Park and the Twilight book Eclipse. I want to share a brief quote from one of our author's books, Truth, A Story of Canrenu West by Mary Ransom. She did deserve a different ending than the one that haunted her continually. Nobody deserved an ending that bad. You can learn more about Annabelle and the book that tells about everything she's ever done on our website at kingrepress.com. Okay, Mansfield Park. Fanny Price is an outsider. And though Mansfield Park is her home and she's the heroine of this story, she doesn't act like it. She's more like Measure for Measure. She's the balancer and the voice of reason in the story. Does she struggle? Yes. And that's her moral dilemma. She is pressured to go against the things she believes in, and it is love that holds her in check. It is this overcoming factor of her fidelity to these high morals which she believes. And actually, it's one of my favorite books. Characters like Fanny are really interesting because they're usually not the hero. And even like when Shakespeare did the play Measure for Measure, a lot of times people didn't like that. They didn't necessarily want that balance. And Hamlet is far more interesting. You have this tragedy. It just gets really bad, really worse, and a lot worse, and then terrible, and everybody's dead. Even Dante's Inferno, like, there's something intriguing about that book, and you probably hear it talked about more than Paradismo. And I think there's just this draw towards that. And then you have a character like Fanny Price, who's this mediator, and she does seem like an outsider in her own story, where they try to push her to the front and she resists. But aren't those characters important too? And isn't there a struggle there? Like, there's a struggle with her in her world and holding the things she believes and values as true while the pressure of everybody around her pushes up against that. And I think we've all experienced that. We've all been Fanny in some respects. But she's not a favorite character for most people who like Austen. They don't choose Mansfield Park. I tend to really like Fanny Price. I like her character and what it does. And she's a foil to the plots and plans of everybody else. She's a disruptor in that way because she does hold these high moral values. And I find that really intriguing and interesting, and also not one that is such a common type of character because they don't tend to make the hero. Then in Twilight, we have a very different setting from Mansfield Park, from Hamlet, though maybe not so much from the Inferno, according to Edward himself, possibly. So we have Twilight, the book Eclipse. Edward believes that he's a creature of the damned. And for this reason, he struggles to commit to making Bella so permanently to make her a vampire. Why? Because he doesn't want to damn her soul. And that he is lost, he will not allow her to have the same fate. But Bella, of course, doesn't believe this, and she kind of debates with him on this. And her point is that his conviction that she has a soul and it should be saved, that he can't be damned because he's good, and his concern proves it, and love's the reason. So love is that overcoming factor, which we've seen before. And honestly, when it comes to moral resolve and dilemmas, there is this is the true comedy and tragedy. Love conquering all, and there's a marriage and everything resolves happily. That's comedy. And then when it doesn't, revenge and all of that, as we saw in Hamlet, tragedy. So the love conquers all is very tied into the comedic form. And of course, Twilight, in its strange way, is a comedy, the series arc. So the dilemma here is this struggle of what two characters believe about themselves. And though Bella is the main character, she's the character it's her perspective that we read from, we still get Edward's tension against her beliefs, wanting to be a vampire. Is she damned? Is she not damned? I mean, this question is the true moral dilemma. All of the variants that we describe, it comes down to soul-deserving facts and truths we believe about ourselves, whatever they might be. It's that internal struggle. Even the question of having a soul is an ethics question. It's a philosophical question. It's a religious question, a moral question. So all of that kind of comes back to this moral dilemma, and the tension here is between two characters debating over this moral question. Do vampires have a soul? Are they really of the damned? And then if that's true, then how could you do that to another person willingly if you know that you would damn them? So it's a great moral question. And with that, I want to wrap up my part where we've discussed now the Inferno from Dante's perspective and the midway in the journey of our lives. I met myself in a wood, for the straight way was lost. The beginning of that question we ask ourselves. And then we go to Hamlet, where it is plot twist after plot twist after plot twist, like whose did it? Why did they do it? Revenge, accident, tragedy, lost love, fathers dying everywhere, not sure about your mother, betrayal by uncles, plays within plays, friends who are trying to get the truth out of you. They die in your place because you set them up, although you were set up in the first place by your uncle. So many plot twists. And this moral dilemma, justice versus revenge. And you have that question in place in the play Hamlet. And then Mansfield Park, we have a character who isn't often a character or a hero in many stories because they are the balanced scale. And then the story is more about the characters working around that person or trying to influence that person, and they resist the influence. And lastly, we have the real question, Do we have a soul? Do we not have a soul? And this is put into the place of vampires and still asking that question. So here you're using fantasy to ask a question that many people have asked throughout the ages. So whether your answer is yes or no, I'll leave you to your own moral dilemmas. And now I'd like to introduce you to Amber Champagne, whose skincare line Ethyst is my BFF. Ethyst Skincare combats hormonal issues and aging, simultaneously leaving you with healthy, radiant skin. I use many of the Ethyst Skincare line products, including my February fave Abundance, the lip plumper. Ethyst Skincare, real science, real results. Learn more at champagneapothecary.com. Now here's Amber with her take on Twilight and Edward's angst.
You know, one of the most fascinating aspects of Twilight, yes, I'm talking about Twilight, but please don't tell the Vampiric Council, they hate that, is the way it forces us to confront a moral dilemma that has been around for centuries. The soul. Do vampires have souls? Edward Cullen, the 104-year-old vampire, spends much of the series wrestling with this very question, and it really makes you think, can someone who has lived for centuries truly still be capable of love? Should they be? I mean, we're talking about someone who's had hundreds of years to reflect, maybe even regret, but also commit some pretty questionable actions along the way. It's almost as if the immortality of the vampire is a metaphor for an eternal moral crossroads where the line between right and wrong becomes blurrier and blurrier as time goes on. Wait, this hits a little too close to home. Let's take a step back and think about this from a different angle. Maybe Edward's existential crisis isn't as deep as it seems. I mean, after 746 years of life, 104 years of life, he's had more than enough time to think about it. His problem is that he's overthinking. Seriously, how many times can you ask yourself the same question before it becomes the philosophical version of stalking the same deer for hours? At some point, you get really hungry and you have to ask yourself, does it really matter if you have a soul? I get it. I do. Edward's angst is relatable, but come on, after 746 years, 104 years, we've had enough time to get through all those deep thoughts and maybe, develop some hobbies. By 104, the only question I was asking was whether or not I'd find a skincare routine that would keep me glowing through the ages. Seriously, how many centuries do you have to live before someone creates a skincare line that gives me the glow of moonlight and is actually effective? Edward's still in phase 1.9 of his vampiric transition. The eternal loop of questioning whether or not he's worthy of love, redemption, or even, life itself. It can be exhausting to watch, but it's a common vampiric side effect. Listen, I'm not saying the whole thing doesn't deserve some consideration, but maybe it's time to get out of your head a little. At 104, I'd stopped worrying if I deserved love and was busy learning about skincare ingredients and getting through all the books I missed over the years. Do you know how much reading you can catch up on in a few centuries? A lot. But I digress. The truth is, after all these years of wandering the earth, I've come to a pretty profound realization. It's not about finding your soul. It's about finding the right skincare serum. Do you know how many products I've tried in 746 years? Way too many to count. The real moral dilemma is mainstream skincare marketing, especially now that we're dealing with BlackRock. I don't mean to sound dismissive of Edward's constant soul searching, but after living for centuries, you've got to stop overthinking everything. Sure, you're haunted by moments of self-reflection and some regret, but you also start to get really into the little things, like making the perfect cup of tea or debating if Victorian fashion should have a comeback, which, by all means, it should. If I can just speak directly to Edward for a moment. Edward, my gosh, get good. Have you considered taking up knitting? Or, organizing your 400-year-old library? It might help. You spend all your time moping in the woods. You have time to get really good at things. Sometimes you just need to put down that angst, man, and start enjoying the simple pleasures of immortality, like the joy of a well-executed herbal mocktail or the simple satisfaction of a flawless piano composition, which I know you love. You're stuck in a never-ending cycle of despair, agonizing over whether or not you're capable of love. Your real dilemma, dude, is overthinking. I'd gotten over my existential crisis by year 100. We've both been through a lot over all of these years. We've seen wars, revolutions, art movements, and some seriously questionable fashion choices. And I can tell you this, the best things in life come from just living. Well, not living, like with the breath and all of that, but by simply being. And by being, I mean enjoying every day for what it is, without getting caught up in the cyclical thinking of moral dilemmas. While time doesn't heal all wounds, as you obviously know, it does change perspective. Immortality gives you plenty of time to ponder. You start off thinking you're seeking answers, and then after a couple centuries, you're just trying to figure out how to avoid a sunburn. Trust me, as much as I love a good moral quandary, you'll eventually stop caring so much about what you are and just focus on the important things. Like, how many centuries do I have to live before someone invents a moisturizer that actually works? 7, by the way, and I had to create it myself. No. Back to our listeners. I'm sure you've picked up on a few things. Maybe it's how I seem to know a lot about vampiric culture, or how I look younger as the years go by, although most people think that's just from Ethyst. Or maybe it's just the fact that I've been talking about my age a little too openly, but yes, I'm a vampire. However, I'm currently on an NDA with the Vampiric Council, so if you can just keep that to yourself, I'd be eternally grateful. Anyway, 746 years is a long time to ponder all of the moral dilemmas, to figure out what really matters. And right now, it's not dealing with the wrath of the Vampiric Council. It's about how to keep my skin looking flawless while navigating the vampire with a tortured past stereotype. So again, if you can just keep this all to yourself, that'd be great.
Thank you for listening to our first official episode of Papercuts and Plot Twists. The books we covered in today's podcast were The Inferno by Dante Alighieri, Hamlet by Shakespeare, Mansfield Park by Jane Austen, and Twilight Eclipse by Stephenie Meyer. We'll be back here in 2 weeks with episode 2, Good Old-Fashioned Fantasy. If you'd like to stay in touch, sign up for our newsletter at kingarypress.com.
What's the risk? Just another day in the life, just another plot twist. But is it a tragedy, a comedy, romantasy, just another fantasy? It's Papercuts and Plot Twists. The rest we'll wait and see.